When Elias Langford publicly declares his love for Selah, a young enslaved woman working in his father's household, he defies every social convention of their southern society. Separated by his father's schemes and sold away to Georgia, Selah believes she'll never see Elias again, but true love knows no boundaries as Elias embarks on a desperate journey to find the woman he promised to make his wife against all odds. Before we start this story, comment Bel Ur from where you are watching us. The Langford estate stood out among all the other properties in Virginia. It wasn't just the size of the land or the beautiful white columns on the front porch. It was the power that lived inside those walls, the kind of power that came from old money and the backs of those who worked the fields. Selah moved quietly through the dining room, a crystal wine pitcher in her hands. At 24, she had spent most of her life serving in this house, learning how to be invisible while standing right in front of people. Tonight was another fancy dinner, where rich men gathered to talk business and politics while eating food they never bothered to thank her for serving. She kept her eyes lowered as she approached Mr. Rupert Halbridge, one of the wealthiest men in the county. His reputation for cruelty toward his slaves was well known, but here, in the Langford home, he was treated like royalty. "More wine, sir?" Selah asked softly. Halbridge looked up, his eyes moving over her face in a way that made her skin crawl. Then he laughed, loud enough to make heads turn. "Lovely hands for a girl in rags," he said, his voice carrying across the table. "But still just a slave girl." The room went quiet. Selah's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't react. She'd heard worse. She started to move away when a chair scraped against the flue bar. Elias Langford stood up. At 26, he was the only son and heir to everything his father owned. Selah knew him better than anyone realized. Much better. "You're wrong," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "That's not just a slave girl. That's my future wife." Gasps filled the room. Selah nearly dropped the pitcher. She'd known about Elias's feelings. They had shared secret moments for months now. But never had she imagined he would announce them like this in front of everyone who mattered in his world. Halbridge's face turned red. "You can't be serious, boy." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Elias replied, his eyes never leaving Selah's face. Mr. Langford, Elias's father, choked on his drink. "Elias, that's enough," he barked. But Elias stepped away from the table, moving to stand beside Selah. "She's the woman I love. She has more dignity in her silence than half the men in this room have in their titles." "Have you lost your mind?" his father demanded, standing up now too. "This dinner is over. Everyone, please excuse us. My son is clearly unwell." The guests began to leave, murmuring to each other, some looking scandalized, others amused. Halbridge was the last to go, his eyes narrowed with disgust. "You'll regret this foolishness, young man," he said as he passed. When the room was empty except for the three of them, Mr. Langford turned to his son. "How dare you embarrass me like this, in my own home?" "This is my home too," Elias said, "and I won't pretend anymore." "Pretend? You mean you've been carrying on with this girl?" Mr. Langford looked at Selah as if she was something dirty. "Her name is Selah," Elias said firmly, "and yes, I love her." Mr. Langford's face twisted with rage. "Get out of my sight, both of you. We'll discuss this in the morning when you've come to your senses." Selah followed Elias out to the garden, her heart racing. The night air was cool against her skin, and the stars above seemed to be watching them. "Why would you say that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why now?" Elias turned to her, reaching for her hands. "Because I've hidden you long enough, and I won't build my life in a house that makes you small." "But you've put us both in danger," she said. "Your father will never accept to his. And what about the others? They'll come after me. You know they will." "I'll protect you," he promised. "I've thought about this for months. I have money saved, my mother's inheritance that my father can't touch. We could leave here, go north." Selah shook her head. "You don't understand what you've done. You didn't free me, you marked me. Everyone will be watching me now, waiting for me to make one mistake." "I'll free you tomorrow," he promised, "by LR, by paper, by anything they need to see. But to me, you've always been free." She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that there could be a future for them. But Selah knew the world they lived in better than Elias did. She had felt its cruelty in ways he never would. "How did this happen?" she whispered, not really asking him, but wondering at the strange path that had led them here. Elias smiled softly. "It started with the hat book, remember?" She did remember. 8 months ago, she had been dusting the library when Elias caught her lingering over a book of poetry he had left open on the desk. "Can you read?" he had asked, surprising her. Selah had almost lied, knowing how dangerous it was for slaves to be literate. But something in his eyes told her she could trust him. "Yes," she had admitted, "my mother taught me before she was sold." Instead of anger, Elias had shown interest. He began leaving books for her to find, poetry, novels, even newspapers, notes hidden between pages, words just for her. Then came the conversations, brief at first when no one was looking, behind the stables, in the quiet corners of the garden. He asked about her thoughts, her dreams, things no one had ever cared to know. One night, after she had been punished for a broken dish, he found her crying behind the kitchen. He sat with her until her tears stopped, asking nothing, demanding nothing. Just being there. They had never kissed. They didn't need to. Their love was made of knowing, of seeing each other when the rest of the world looked past. "Your father will never allow this," Selah said now, bringing them back to the reality of their situation. "He doesn't have to allow it," Elias replied. "I'm a grown man. I can make my own choices." "But he owns me," Selah reminded him. "By law, I belong to Hayem, not to myself." "Laws can be changed. Papers can be signed. I'll speak to him in the morning." Selah wished she could share his confidence, but she had seen too many promises broken, too many hopes crushed. "What if he refuses?" she asked. "Then we'll leave, tonight, if we have to." "Leave everything? Your inheritance? Your future?" Elias cupped her face in his hands. "You are my future, Selah. Everything else is just things." For a moment, she let herself believe. She closed her eyes and imagined a life where she wasn't property, where she could walk beside Elias instead of behind him, where their love wasn't a scandal but simply love. "I should go," she said finally. "The others will be wondering where I am." "Meet me here tomorrow," Elias said, "after I speak with my father. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Selah nodded, though fear still gripped her heart. She watched him walk back to the house, his shoulders straight, his step determined. She had never loved him more than in that moment, and never been more afraid of what that love might cost them both. The next morning came with a heavy fog that seemed to wrap around the Langford estate like a shroud. Selah went about her duties, avoiding the curious and sometimes hostile stares of the other house slaves. Word had spread quickly about what happened at dinner. "You think you're better than us now?" Martha, the cook, asked her sharply. "Think you'll be the mistress of this house?" "No," Selah said quietly. "I don't think that at all." "Well, you'd best be careful," Martha warned. "Master Langford is in a rage this morning. I've never seen him so angry." Selah's stomach twisted with fear, but she kept working. She had no choice. Freedom was still just a word, not her reality. Meanwhile, Elias knocked on the door of his father's study, H's heart pounding but his resolve firm. "Come in," came the gruff response. Mr. Langford sat behind his massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey already in his hand despite the early hour. His face was flushed, his eyes hard. "I hope you've come to apologize for last night's disgraceful display," he said without preamble. "I haven't," Elias replied, standing tall. "I meant every word." His father slammed the glass down. "Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what you've done? The Halbridge deal is in jeopardy now. He called this morning to say he's reconsidering our arrangement." "I don't care about the Halbridge deal." "You should. It's your future too, boy. This estate, this family's position, it all depends on alliances with men like Halbridge." "There are other ways to secure our future," Elias argued, "ways that don't involve compromising what's right." Mr. Langford laughed bitterly. "What's right? You think it's right to throw away your birthright for some slave girl? To bring shame on this family name? Her name is Selah, Elias said through gritted teeth, and loving her brings no shame to me. Love? His father spat the word like it tasted foul. You don't love her. You're just rebelling against me, against your responsibilities. You're wrong, I've loved her for months, I just didn't have the courage to admit it until now. Mr. Langford studied at his son's face, seeming to search for some sign of uncertainty. Finding none, his expression hardened. Sit down, he ordered. Elias remained standing. I said, sit down. Reluctantly, Elias took a seat across from his father. Now listen to me carefully, Mr. Langford said, his voice dangerously quiet. I know you think this is some grand romance, but it ends today. The girl belongs to me, and she will remain my property until I decide otherwise. I went to buy her freedom, Elias said. I have money from mother's inheritance. It's not for sale. Everything has a price. Not this. Mr. Langford leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You will publicly retract what you said last night. You'll claim it was a joke that went too far. Then you'll go to Charleston for a few months until this blows over. I've already written to your uncle, he's expecting you. And if I refuse, his father's eyes narrowed, then I'll sell her. Today, to a buyer so far away you'll never find her. The threat hit Elias like a physical blow. He knew his father well enough to know it wasn't a bluff. You wouldn't. Try me. Mr. Langford pulled out a document from his desk drawer. I've already drawn up the papers. One word from me and she's gone by nightfall. Elias felt the walls closing in around him. He had underestimated his father's ruthlessness. Let me see he said finally, before I leave. So you can run away together? Do you think I'm a fool? No, Elias said, his mind racing. Just let me say goodbye. Please. Something in his voice must have reached his father, because after a long moment Mr. Langford nodded. You have 10 minutes in the garden, where I can see you from this window. Elias stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. Have the papers ready, he said. The papers for her freedom. The will be no freedom papers. Then I won't go to Charleston. The two men stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Mr. Langford reached for a blank document. Fine, but only after you're gone. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Elias watched as his father began to write out the manumission papers, the document that would legally recognize Selah as a free woman. When he was finished, Mr. Langford signed it with a flourish, then he held it up for Elias to see. Satisfied? Elias reached for it, but his father pulled it back. After you're gone, he repeated, then deliberately tore the paper in half. Insurance, you might say. Half now, half when you're safely in Charleston. How do I know you'll complete it? You have my word as a Langford. Elias wanted to laugh at that. His father's word meant nothing when it came to the lives of those he considered property. But he had no choice. Not if he wanted to protect Selah. 10 minutes, his father reminded him, in the garden. Then you pack your things and leave today. Elias nodded, then turned and walked out. His mind was working furiously, trying to find a way out of this trap. There had to be a solution, some path they hadn't considered. Selah was already waiting in the garden when he arrived, her face tight with worry. She could read the answer in his expression before he said a word. He refused, she said. Elias nodded, glancing back at the house where he knew his father was watching from the study window. He's sending me to Charleston, he said quietly, and he's threatened to sell you if I don't go. Selah's face paled, but she didn't look surprised. I told you he would never allow this. I thought I could reason with him. I was wrong. So you're leaving? It wasn't a question. I have to. It's the only way to keep you safe. Essed, he looked down at her hands, those hands that Halbridge had mockingly called lovely. Then this is goodbye. No, Elias said firmly. It's not goodbye. It's just a pause. A pause? I made him start the freedom papers, Elias explained. He's keeping half until I leave, but once I'm gone, he'll complete them. You'll be free, Selah. Hope flickered in her eyes, but it was cautious, uncertain. Do you really believe he'll honor that promise? Elias wanted to say yes to reassure her, But he couldn't lie. I don't know, but it's our best chance right now. And then what? What happens once I'm free? Then you can leave here. Go north, like we talked about. I'll find a way to join you. It sounded impossible, even as he said it. How would she survive alone? How would they find each other again? I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. So am I, he confessed. They stood there, inches apart but unable to touch, aware of the watching eyes from the house. I have to go, Elias said finally. But I need you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, I will find you again, I promise. Selah nodded, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I'll hold you to that promise, Elias Langford. He wanted to kiss her, to hold her just once before they were separated, but he knew that any such display would only put her in more danger. Wait for me on the porch tonight, he whispered. After everyone is asleep, I need to give you something before I go. She nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned and walked back toward the house, her head held high despite the heaviness in her heart. That night, Elias packed his belongings, his movements mechanical. He was going through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on what he needed to do. When the house was quiet and dark, he slipped out to the front porch. Selah was already there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. How you came, he said, relief in his voice. I said I would. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Take this, he said, pressing it into her hand. It's not much, but it might help when you get your freedom. Selah opened the pouch to find a collection of coins and a small gold ring. It was my theirs, Elias explained. The only thing of hers I have left. I want you to have it. I can't take this, she protested. Please, so you'll remember. She closed her fingers around the ring, then looked up at him, as if I could forget. Elias glanced back at the house, making sure they were still alone. Then he did what he had been wanting to do for so long. He pulled her close and kissed her, pouring all his fear and hope and love into that one perfect moment. When they broke apart, both were breathless. I couldn't give you the paper yet, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But if you say yes, I'll give you my name. Selah stared at him, understanding slowly dawning on her face. Are you asking? Marry me, he said. Not now, not here, but someday, somewhere, when we're both truly free. Say you'll be my wife. She lifted his hand to her cheek, her eyes shining with tears and starlight. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. The moment was broken by the sudden sound of the door slamming open behind them. They turned to see Mr. Langford standing there, his face twisted with rage. I knew it, he growled. I knew you were planning something. Father, please, get in the house, Mr. Langford ordered Selah. Now. She hesitated, looking at Elias. Go, Elias told her softly. It's all right. As Selah slipped past Mr. Langford into the house, the older man turned his fury on his son. You've made your choice, he said coldly, and now you'll live with the consequences. What does that mean? Elias demanded. His father's smile was cruel. It means you'll leave for Charleston tomorrow as planned, but she won't be here when you return. You promised. I promised nothing. Get out of my sight. As his father turned to go back inside, Elias called after him. This isn't over. Mr. Langford paused, one hand on the door. You're right about that, son. This is just the beginning. The door slammed shut, leaving Elias alone on the porch. The night suddenly colder, darker, and filled with a new kind of fear, not for himself, but for the woman he loved, now trapped inside with a man who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in a game of power and control. Somehow he had to find a way to save her, to give her the freedom and the name she deserved. The e-carriage that would take Elias to Charleston arrived early the next morning. He stood in the front hall, his bag at his feet, his heart like a stone in his chest. He hadn't seen Selah since their interrupted moment on the porch. His father had made sure of that. Remember our agreement, Mr. Langford said, his voice low. You go to Charleston and stay there for at least 3 months. No letters, no contact. And Selah remains here, safe, Elias insisted. That was the deal. His father's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I want to see her before I go. That won't be possible. She's attending to duties elsewhere on the estate. Elias didn't believe him for a second, but what choice did he have? If he refused to leave, his father would sell Sela immediately. At least this way he had bought them some time. 3 months, he said. Not a day longer. We'll see, his father replied. Elias picked up his bag and walked out to the waiting carriage. As the driver took his luggage, he looked back at the house one last time, hoping for a glimpse of Sela. But all he saw was his father, standing in the doorway like a sentry. "Charleston awaits, sir," the driver said, opening the carriage door. With a heavy heart, Elias climbed in. As the carriage pulled away, he made a silent promise to Sela. He would return. Whatever it took, he would come back for Hiar. What Elias didn't know was that Sela was locked in a small storage room off the kitchen. She had been there since last night, after Mr. Langford caught them on the porch. She had heard the carriage arrive and then leave again, taking Elias away from her. The door opened, and Martha, the cook, stood there with a tray of food. "Master says to give you this," she said, placing the tray on the floor, "and to tell you you'll stay here until he decides what to do with you." "Is Elias gone?" Sela asked. Martha nodded. "Left for Charleston just now." She hesitated, then added in a gentler tone, "You should eat. Keep your strength up." After Martha left, Sela sank down on the small cot that had been her bed for the night. She fingered the gold ring Elias had given her, which she had managed to hide in her dress before Mr. Langford caught them. It was her only comfort now, her only proof that what had happened between them was real. She knew Mr. Langford wouldn't keep his word about freeing her. In fact, she was certain he was already making plans to get rid of her, to make sure she and Elias never saw each other again. The question was, what would he do, and how quickly would he do it? The answer came 3 days later, when Mr. Langford himself unlocked the storage room door. "Get up," he ordered, "and come with me." Sela followed him to his study, where a straw Unger waited, a thin man with cold eyes and well-worn clothes that spoke of travel. "This is Mr. Baxter," Mr. Langford said. "He's a slave trader from Georgia." Sela felt the blood drain from her face. She had been right. Mr. Langford was going to sell her, and far away, just as he had threatened. "She'll do," Mr. Baxter said, looking her over with a practiced eye. "Healthy, young. What skills does she have?" "Household work mainly," Mr. Langford replied. "Reading too, though I'd keep that quiet if I were you." Mr. Baxter raised an eyebrow. "Reading? Not sure if that's a benefit or a problem. That's your concern now, not mine." Sela found her voice at last. "You promised Elias you would free me." Mr. Langford turned to her, his expression cold. "I promised to consider it. I've considered it, and my answer is no." "He'll never forgive you for this," she said. "He's young. He'll forget you soon enough." Mr. Baxter cleared his throat. "If we're agreed on the price, I'd like to be on my way. Got a long journey ahead." "We're agreed," Mr. Langford said, pulling out a document. "Just sign here." As the men completed their transaction, Sela's mind raced. She had to find a way to leave a message for Elias, to let him know what had happened and where she was being taken. But how? She had no paper, no pen, and no time. "Get your things," Mr. Baxter told her when he papers were signed. "We leave in 10 minutes. "I have nothing," Sela replied. All her meager belongings were in the slave quarters, and she hadn't been allowed to go there since the night on the porch. Mr. Langford sighed. "Martha will give you a change of clothes. Nothing more." In the kitchen, Martha hurriedly packed a small bundle for her. "I heard what's happening," she whispered. "I'm sorry, girl." "Can you get a message to Elias?" Sela asked desperately. "When he comes back?" Martha looked nervous. "I don't know. Master would be furious. Please, just tell him I've been sold to a trader named Baxter from Georgia, that's all." Martha hesitated, then nodded quickly. "I'll try. Now hurry, before they come looking for you." Sela tucked Elias's ring deep into the pocket of her dress. It was the only thing she had of him, and she wouldn't let it be taken from her. Then she followed Mr. Baxter out to his wagon, where 3 other slaves were already chained and waiting. As they drove away from the Langford estate, Selah looked back one last time. She had spent most of her life within those walls. Now she was heading into the unknown, away from the only man who had ever seen her as more than property, who had offered her his name and his heart. She closed her eyes and made a silent promise, echoing the one Elias had made to her. Somehow, someday, they would find each other again. The journey south was long and grueling. Mr. Baxter wasn't deliberately cruel, but he wasn't kind either. He treated his human cargo as valuable merchandise, nothing more. They traveled for days, stopping at various plantations where Mr. Baxter would try to sell one or more of his slaves. 2 weeks into the journey, they reached a large plantation in northern Georgia. The main house was smaller than the Langford estate, but the fields stretched for miles, cotton as far as the eye could see. "Wait here," Mr. Baxter told his remaining slaves, just Selah and a young man named Jacob now. The others had been sold along the way. As they sat in the wagon, Jacob whispered to her, "This is Turner Plantation. Bad place. Master Turner works his field hands to death." Selah's heart sank. If she was sold here, Elias would never find her. And from what Jacob said, she might not survive long. Enough for him to try. But when Mr. Baxter returned, he was shaking his head. "Not interested in house slaves," he muttered. "Waste of time coming here." Relief flooded through Selah, but it was short-lived. Their next stop, just before sundown, was a modest house on the outskirts of a small town. A sign outside read, "Mrs. Eleanor Winston's boarding house." "This might be the place for you," Mr. Baxter told Selah. "Widow Winston needs help running her boarding house. Lost her last girl to fever." A thin, grey-haired woman came out to meet them. She had a stern face but clear, intelligent eyes. "You have a house slave for sale?" she asked Mr. Baxter. "Yes, ma'am. This is Selah. Good worker, knows her way around a kitchen, can even read if that's of interest to you." Mrs. Winston looked surprised. "Read? Really?" Mr. Baxter immediately looked like he regretted mentioning it. "Just a little. Enough to make you tea labels and such." Mrs. Winston studied Selah's face. "Can you really read, girl?" Selah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, that's unusual. Might be useful, though." She turned back to Mr. Baxter. "What's your price?" They haggled for a few minutes, then came to an agreement. Just like that, Selah had a new owner. Mrs. Winston paid in cash, and Mr. Baxter handed over the bill of sale. "She's all yours," he said. "Good luck to you both." As he drove away with Jacob still in the wagon, Selah felt a strange mix of fear and hope. At least she hadn't ended up at the Turner plantation. But she was still far from Elias, with no way to let him know where she was. "Come inside," Mrs. Winston said. "I'll show you your duties." The boarding house was clean and well kept, with 6 rooms for rent upstairs and a large dining room and parlor downstairs. Mrs. Winston lived in a small suite of rooms off the kitchen. "You'll sleep here," she said, showing Selah a tiny room next to the pantry. It was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table, and a hook on the wall for clothes. "I expect you up at 5 to start breakfast. Guests eat at 7. Rooms need to be cleaned daily. Dinner is at 6. Questions?" "No, ma'am," Selah replied. "Good. And this reading ability of yours, is it true?" "Yes, ma'am. I can read and write." Mrs. Winston's eyebrows rose. "War write too? Well, that might be very useful indeed. I run this place on my own since my husband died, and keeping the books is a chore. We'll see how you do with the regular work first, though." It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't the Turner plantation either. Selah took a deep breath and resolved to make the best of her situation. For now, this was her life. And maybe, just maybe, it would give her the opportunity to find a way back to Elias. Meanwhile, in Chari, Leston Elias was miserable. His uncle, Mr. Richard Langford, was a stern man cut from the same cloth as his father. The house was large and comfortable, but it felt like a prison. "Your father wrote to me about this infatuation of yours," Uncle Richard said over dinner on Elias's first night. "Most unfortunate." "It's not an infatuation," Elias replied. "I love her." His uncle waved a dismissive hand. "Call it what you will. It's impossible, of course. The sooner you accept that, the better. Nothing is impossible. Some things are unwise, even if they're technically possible. Uncle Richard studied him over his wineglass. You're young, Elias. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away over some romantic fantasy. Elias didn't bother arguing further. His uncle, like his father, would never understand. Instead, he focused on biding his time. 3 months. That was the deal. Then, he would return home and ensure that Sela received her freedom, as promised. But as the weeks passed, he grew increasingly anxious. His father had refused his requests to correspond, insisting that a clean break was best. Elias had no way of knowing if Sela was safe, if his father was treating her well, if the freedom papers were being prepared as agreed. Finally, after 6 weeks of silence, a letter arrived from home. But it wasn't from his father. It was from Martha, the cook. Elias tore it open, his hands shaking. "Young Master Elias," it read in a careful, unpracticed hand, "I risk much by writing this, but I promised. Your father sold Sela 2 days after you left to a trader named Baxter from Georgia. She asked me to tell you, that's all I know. Be careful if you come back. Your father is still very angry. Martha." The paper fell from Elias's numb fingers. Sold. His father had sold her, breaking his WORD completely, and not just sold her locally, but to Georgia, hundreds of miles away. Rage and grief warred within him. He had trusted his father's word, despite his doubts. He had left Sela behind, thinking she would be safe until he returned. Now she was gone, taken far beyond his reach. But not forever. He wouldn't accept that. He would find her no matter how long it took. That night, Elias made new plans. He couldn't go home now. His father had made Tihat impossible. But he had resources of his own. His mother's inheritance, which had been held in trust for him, was now available since he had turned 25 last year. He could access those funds without his father's knowledge or permission. The next morning, he went to the bank where his mother's family had done business for generations. "I'd like to withdraw a substantial amount from my trust," he told Mr. Simmons, the bank manager who had known Hayas' mother. "Of course, Mr. Langford. How much were you thinking?" "Half of what's available." Mr. Simmons looked surprised. "That's a considerable sum. May I ask what it's for?" "Personal business," Elias replied firmly. The older man nodded, not pushing further. "Very well. It will take a day or two to arrange. Will you want banknotes or a draft?" "Both. Some of each." Back at his uncle's house, Elias began packing his things. He had no intention of staying the full 3 months now. There was no point. The agreement with his father was broken and Sela needed him. "Going somewhere?" Uncle Richard asked, finding him in his room with his bags half-packed. "Yes," Elias said simply. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Your father won't be pleased." "My father broke his word. He sold Sela." His uncle sighed. "I suspected he might. That's why he sent you here, to get you out of the way while he did it." "You knew?" Elias demanded, anger flaring. "And you didn't warn me?" "It wasn't my place to interfere between a father and son. Besides, he did what he thought was best for you. Best for me. He sold the woman I love to punish me for loving her." Uncle Richard shook his head. "No, Elias. He did it to save you from yourself, from a choice that would have ruined your life and your standing in society. I don't care about my standing in society, I care about her. So you're going to chase after her, a slave sold to Georgia? Do you have any idea how foolish that sounds?" Elias straightened his shoulders. "I know exactly how it sounds, but I'm going to find her, and when I do, I'm going to marry her." His uncle stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head sadly. "You're just like your mother. She was headstrong too. It didn't end well for her." "What do you mean?" Elias asked, caught off guard. His mother had died when he was 10, and his father rarely spoke of her. "Nothing. Ancient history." Uncle Richard turned to leave, then paused at the door. "If you're determined to go, I won't stop you. But don't expect your father to welcome you back with open arms. You're choosing a different path now, Elias. Be sure it's the one you want." After his uncle left, Elias sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what he had said about his mother. There had always been whispers, things not said openly. His parents' marriage had been arranged, that much he knew, but they had seemed happy enough in his childhood memories. He shook his head. There was no time for those questions now. He had more pressing concerns. Finding Sela was all that mattered. The next day, with his funds secured and his belongings packed, Elias bid farewell to his uncle. To his surprise, the older man seemed genuinely concerned. "Be careful, Elias," he said. "The path you're choosing is a dangerous one. I know the risks. Do you? It's not just social disapproval you'll face. There are laws against what you're planning. Helping a slave escape, marrying outside your race. These things could land you in prison." "I'll be careful," Elias promised, "and thank you for not trying harder to stop me." His uncle sighed. "You're a grown man, and perhaps there are some fights worth having, even when the odds are against you." It was the closest thing to approval Elias could have hoped for. His first stop was a small inn on the outskirts of Charleston, where he could gather information and plan his next move. He needed to find this trader, Baxter, and trace his route. Georgia was a big state, and Sela could be anywhere by now. He spent days talking to people who might know something, other traders, stagecoach drivers, travelers from Georgia. Slowly he began to piece together Baxter's usual route and the types of plantations he typically visited. One evening, as he was studying a map in his room at the inn, there was a knock at the door. A young black man stood there, hat in hand. "You the man asking about Baxter the slave trader?" he asked in a low voice. Elias nodded, instantly alert. "Do you know him?" "Worked for him once, driving his wagon. Left his employ last year." The man glanced nervously down the hall. "Can I come in? Don't want to be seen talking to you." Elias stepped aside, letting him enter, then closed the door. "What's your name?" "William, sir. People call me Will." "You're a free man?" Will nodded. "Yes, sir. Born free in Pennsylvania. Came south looking for work and found more trouble than I bargained for." "Tell me about Baxter," Elias said. "I need to find someone he sold recently. A young woman named Sela." Will's eyes widened slightly. "You looking to buy her?" "No, to free her." Elias hesitated, then decided to trust this man. "She's the woman I love." Will studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I've heard stranger things, I suppose. Can't say I've ever met a white man willing to go to such lengths for a slave, though." "She's not just a slave," Elias said firmly. "She's the woman I'm going to marry." Will's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't comment further on that. "Well, if you want to find someone Baxter sold, your best bet is to follow his route. He's a creature of habit, visits the same places every time." "Do you know his route?" "Sure do. Drove it myself more times than I care to remember." Will took the map Elias had been studying and pointed to several towns. "He starts in Virginia, works his way down through the Carolinas, then into Georgia. Stops at all the major plantations, and some smaller places too if he's heard they're buying." "And where does he usually end up?" "Atlanta, usually. That's where he lives. Has a house there and a yard where he keeps any slaves he hasn't sold yet." Elias felt a surge of hope. This was exactly the information he needed. "Would you be willing to guide me? I'll pay well." Will looked hesitant. "It's risky, sir. People will talk if they see us traveling together. I can say you're my servant, or my guide, which would be the truth. And when we start asking questions about a slave trader and a specific slave, that will raise eyebrows. I'll be discreet," Elias promised. "And again, I'll pay well, very well." Will thought for a moment, then nodded. "D. All right, but I set the terms. We travel careful, stay out of sight when we can, and if things get too hot, I walk away. No offense, but this isn't my fight." "Agreed," Elias said, extending his hand. Will looked surprised at the gesture, but he shook Elias's hand firmly. "We leave at dawn tomorrow, pack light, we'll be moving fast." After Will left, Elias sat down to write 2 letters. The first was to his father, brief and to the point. "I know what you did. Don't expect me back until I find her." Elias's. The second was to his uncle. "Thank you for your hospitality and for not standing in my way. "I found someone who can help me in my search. If you don't hear from me for some time, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Your nephew, Elias." He would mail them before leaving in the morning. After that, he would be focused solely on finding Sela. As he packed his few belongings, Elias took out a small daguerreotype of his mother. It was the only image he had of her, taken just a year before her death. She smiled softly from the silver plate, her eyes kind but somehow sad. "I wish you were here to advise me," he whispered to the image, "to tell me if I'm doing the right thing." But of course there was no answer, just the silence of his room and the weight of the journey ahead. At the same time, hundreds of miles away, Sela was settling into her new Liffey at Mrs. Winston's boarding house. The work was hard but not unbearable. She rose before dawn each day to prepare breakfast for the guests, cleaned rooms, did laundry, served dinner, and fell into bed exhausted each night. Mrs. Winston was strict, but not cruel. She demanded perfect work but didn't punish mistakes with violence, only with sharp words and extra chores. And true to her word, she had begun to use Sela's reading and writing abilities to help with the business. "Read this receipt and tell me if it matches what we actually received," she would say, or "copy these figures into the ledger for me." Small tasks at first, but gradually more complex ones as Mrs. Winston came to trust her abilities. The other surprising thing about her new situation was that Mrs. Winston allowed her to keep a small portion of the tips that guests sometimes left. It wasn't much, just a few cents here and there, but Sela H. saved every penny, hiding them in a small pouch along with Elias's ring. She didn't know what she was saving for exactly. Freedom seemed an impossible dream still, but having even that tiny bit of money made her feel less powerless, less like property, and more like a person. One evening, about 2 months after her arrival, Mrs. Winston called Sela into her private sitting room. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair, a startling request as slaves we are rarely invited to sit in the presence of their owners. Sela perched nervously on the edge of the chair. "You've done well here," Mrs. Winston said. "Better than I expected, to be honest." "Thank you, ma'am. Your reading and writing skills are quite good. Better than just labels, as that trader claimed. Where did you learn?" Sela hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My mother taught me the basics when I was small. Then, someone at my previous home encouraged me to read more." "Someone?" Mrs. Winston raised an eyebrow. "Would that someone be the reason you sometimes cry at night?" Sela looked down, embarrassed that her private grief had been noticed. "Yes, ma'am. I thought as much. There's a story there, I'm sure." Mrs. Winston studied her for a moment. "Well, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I have a proposition for you that might interest you, given your situation." "Ma'am, I need someone who can read and write to help me more substantially with the business. The borders are increasing, and I'm not getting any younger. If you take on these additional responsibilities, I'm prepared to offer you something in return." Sela waited, hardly daring to hope. "I'll allow you to earn your freedom," Mrs. Winston said. "A certain amount each week credited against the price I paid for you. It would take time, 4 or 5 years I'd estimate, but at the end of it you'd be free with papers to prove it." Sela couldn't believe what she was hearing. You would let me buy my freedom?" "Yes, it's not unheard of, you know. Many slave owners in town have similar arrangements with skilled workers. It wasn't immediate freedom. It wasn't being with Elias, but it was a chance, a real chance at a future where she wasn't someone's property." "Thank you, ma'am," Sela said, her voice thick with emotion. "I accept." "Good. We'll start tomorrow. I'll show you the books and explain what I need from you." Mrs. Winston stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "One more thing. Whatever or whoever you left behind, it might be wise to let go of those memories. You're here now and this is your life. Best to make peace with that." Sela nodded, but in her heart she knew she would never let go of Elias. Even if it took years, even if it seemed impossible, she would hold on to the hope of seeing him again. That night, as she lay in her small bed, she took out his ring and held it to her heart. "I'm still waiting," she whispered. Wherever you are, I'm still waiting. And hundreds of miles away, as Elias prepared to begin his journey at dawn, he looked up at the same stars Selah was seeing and made the same silent promise he had made the day he left the Langford estate. He would find her. No matter how long it took, no matter what obstacles stood in his way, he would find the woman he loved and give her the name she deserved. The journey south was harder than Elias had expected. He and Will traveled by horse when possible, by foot when necessary, staying off the main roads and avoiding attention. Will proved to be a valuable guide, familiar with the countryside and cautious about their interactions with others. "We're looking for a friend of mine," Will would say when they needed information. "A trader named Baxter passed through here a few months back, might have had a young woman with him." People were more willing to talk to Will than to Elias about such matters. A black man asking after another black person raised fewer eyebrows than a white gentleman showing interest in a slave he didn't own. They followed Baxter's trail through small towns and large plantations. Sometimes they found people who remembered him and his merchandise, but the information was often vague and contradictory. He had a young woman with him, but she was sold to the Hendersons over in Macon, one stable hand told them. No, Baxter took all his people to Atlanta this time," insisted a shopkeeper in the next town. After 3 weeks of searching, Elias was beginning to lose hope. They had traveled deep into Georgia, and still, no definite word of Selah. "We need to try Atlanta," Will said as they set up camp one night. "Like I told you, that's where Baxter has his base. If he didn't sell her along the way, that's where she'd be." "And if he did sell her?" Elias asked, his voice tight with worry. Will poked at the small fire he'd built. "Then we track down the buyer. It won't be easy, but sales leave paper trails. Bills of sale, property records, we can find her, Mr. Langford." Elias nodded, grateful for Will's determination. The young man had proven to be not just a guide, but a friend, sharing Elias's risks and hardships without complaint. "Why are you helping me, Will?" he asked suddenly. "Really? This isn't your fight like you said." Will was quiet for a moment. "My sister was sold south when I was 15. Our mother was free, but our father was enslaved. We lived in Maryland, right on the border. One day, my sister crossed over into Virginia to visit our father, and slave catchers took her, said she was a runaway." "I'm sorry," Elias said softly. "I never found her, never knew where they took her." Will looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "So, maybe this is my fight after all. Maybe helping you find your Selah is the closest I'll get to finding my sister." The two men sat in silence for a while, the weight of Will's story hanging in the air between them. "We'll find her," Elias said finally. "We'll find Selah, and then, if you want, I'll help you look for your sister." Will gave him a small smile. "One impossible task at a time, Mr. Langford." They reached Atlanta 3 days later. The city was growing rapidly, a hub of commerce and transportation for the region. It was also a center for the slave trade, with several dealers maintaining operations there. Finding Baxter's place of business wasn't difficult. It was a large yard surrounded by a high fence, W with a small office building at the front. A sign over the gate read, "Baxter and Sons, Quality Laborers." "What now?" Will asked as they observed the place from across the street. "Can't just walk in and ask if he's seen your girl." "Why not?" Elias asked. "I'm a potential buyer after all." Will shook his head. "Too risky. Baxter's met you before, remember? When he bought Selah from your father." "No, he hasn't," Elias corrected him. "I was already gone when that happened. He's never seen me." "Still, we need to be careful. These traders talk to each other. Word might have spread about a young man looking for a specific slave." They decided on a plan. Will would go in first, posing as a free black man looking for work as a driver. He would scout the place, see if there was any sign of Selah or any information about where she might have been sold. Elias waited anxiously across the street, watching the gate. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Will emerged. The look on his face told Elias everything he needed to know. "She's not there," Will confirmed when he rejoined Elias. "But I got some information. Baxter keeps records of all his sales. The clerk was friendly enough, thought I might be bringing him business." He mentioned that they sold all their stock from the Virginia-Carolina run 3 months ago. Did he say who bought them, or where they went? Not specifically, but he did say most went to plantations around Savannah. A few to local businesses here in Atlanta. It wasn't much, but it was something. They had narrowed down the search area at least. We should check the local businesses first, Elias decided. Hotels, shops, that sort of thing. Places that might want a house slave with reading abilities. Will agreed, and they spent the next several days discreetly inquiring at every establishment in Atlanta that might have purchased a slave in the past few months. It was slow, careful work. Elias had to be cautious not to reveal too much about his interest in Selah. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly, at a small general store on the outskirts of town. "Baxter," the owner repeated when Will asked. "Yeah, I know him. Bought a boy from him last year. Good worker. Any idea where he might have sold a young woman a few months back? Would have been April or May," Will asked casually. The shopkeeper scratched his chin. He did mention something about selling a girl to Eleanor Winston. Runs a boarding house over in Madison. Said she was real pleased with the purchase. Girl could read and write, apparently. Elias, who had been pretending to examine a display of pocket knives, nearly dropped the one he was holding. Madison, a boarding house, a girl who could read and write. IT had to be Selah. Will, seeing Elias's reaction, quickly thanked the shopkeeper and steered Elias out of the store. "Madison's about 40 miles east of here," Will said once they were outside. "We could be there in 2 days." "Tomorrow," Elias insisted. "We'll leave at first light." That night, Elias could barely sleep. After months of searching, they were finally close. If the shopkeeper's information was correct, if this Eleanor Winston had indeed bought Selah, then his long journey was nearly over. But what then, he wondered? What would he do once he found her? He couldn't simply demand that Mrs. Winston sell Selah to him. That would raise too many questions. And even if he bought her freedom, where would they go? Back to Virginia, where his father's influence could still reach them. North, perhaps, where they might find more acceptance. Questions for later, he decided. First, he had to find her, confirm that she was safe. Everything else could wait. They set out before dawn, pushing their horses as fast as they dared. The road to Madison was well traveled, and they made good time. By late afternoon, they could see the town in the distance. Madison was a picturesque place, with a central square surrounded by neat shops and homes. It didn't take long to find Mrs. Winston's boarding house. It was a large 2-story white building with a sign out front, Anno Unsing, clean rooms, good meals, reasonable rates. "Now what?" Will asked, as they observed the house from across the street. "You can't just walk in and ask to see her." "No," Elias agreed, "but I can take a room there as a guest." Will looked doubtful. "And if she's not there, or if she is, but Mrs. Winston doesn't let her near the guests? Then we'll figure something else out. But I have to try." They separated, with Will finding accommodation at a SM All-In on the other side of town. It wouldn't do for a white gentleman and a black man to arrive together looking for rooms. Elias straightened his clothes, took a deep breath, and walked up to the front door of the boarding house. A bell jangled as he entered, and a moment later an older woman appeared from a back room. "Good afternoon," she said briskly. "Looking for a room?" "Yes, ma'am," Elias replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just for a few nights. I'm passing through on business. $3 a night includes breakfast and dinner. Room at the top of the stairs is available. Clean sheets, good view." "That sounds perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Winston. Eleanor Winston." So this was the woman who had bought Selah. Elias studied her face, trying to gauge what kind of person she might be. Stern, certainly, but not cruel-looking. "Edward Thompson," he said, giving the false name he and Will H. had agreed upon. "Pleased to meet you." Mrs. Winston nodded, then called over her shoulder, "Selah, come show Mr. Thompson to the blue room." Elias's heart nearly stopped. Selah. She was here. She was really here. And then she appeared, and the world seemed to stand still. She looked thinner than he remembered, and there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was her, his Selah. She didn't recognize him at first. Her eyes passed over his face without a flicker of recognition. He had grown a beard during his months of traveling, and his skin was tanned from weeks outdoors. He looked very different from the clean-shaven young gentleman who had left the Langford estate. "This way, sir," she said politely, gesturing toward the stairs. Elias followed her, his mind racing. He couldn't reveal himself here, not with Mrs. Winston watching. He needed to find a moment alone with Selah. The blue room was small but neat, with a bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. "Dinner is at 6 in the dining room," Selah told him, her voice professional and detached. "Breakfast is at 7. Will you need anything else, sir?" "Yes," Elias said, his voice low. "I need you to look at me, Selah. Really look at me." She froze, her eyes widening slightly at his use of he, our name. Slowly, she raised her gaze to his face. "It's me," he whispered. "Elias." For a moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "It can't be," she whispered. "Elias?" He nodded, fighting the urge to pull her into his arms. They couldn't risk being seen like that, not here. How did you find me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've been searching for months, ever since I found out my father sold Yehu." He took a step closer to her. "Are you all right? Has she treated you well?" Selah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, she's strict but fair. Elias, you shouldn't have come. It's too dangerous. I had to find you. I promised I would." Footsteps on the stairs made them both tense. Selah quickly moved to straighten the bed covers, pretending to be finishing her duties. "I'll be down for dinner," Elias said loudly, for the benefit of whoever might be listening. Then, in a whisper, "We need to talk. When can you get away?" "After the guests are in bed," Selah whispered back. "The garden behind the house. There's a bench under the oak tree. Midnight." She left the room just as Mrs. Winston appeared at the top of the stairs. The older woman gave them both a sharp look, but said nothing. The hours until midnight crept by with excruciating slowness. Elias went down to dinner, where he was seated with 3 of her guests, a traveling salesman and an older couple visiting their daughter in town. He made polite conversation, all the while acutely aware of Selah moving quietly around the room, serving food and clearing plates. After dinner, he retired to his room, too anxious to sleep. He sat by the window, watching the moon rise and thinking about what he would say to Selah when they finally had a chance to talk. At last, the house grew quiet. The other guests had gone to bed, and the lights downstairs were extinguished one by one. When the clock in the hall struck midnight, Elias slipped out of his room and down the back stairs. The garden was silver in the moonlight, the old oak tree casting deep shadows. Elias made his way to the bench Selah had mentioned and waited, his heart pounding. She appeared a few minutes later, a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She moved cautiously, glancing back at the house to make sure no one was watching. When she reached the bench, Elias stood. For a moment, they just looked at each other, drinking in the sight after so many months apart. Then Selah whispered, "Is it really you?" Instead of answering, Elias did what he had been wanting to do since the moment he saw her again. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her. She clung to him, her tears wet against his cheek. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her face against his chest, as if to convince herself he was real. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said. "When your father sold me, I was sure I would have found you eventually," Elias said firmly, "no matter how long it took." They sat on the bench, hands tightly clasped, and Selah told him everything that had happened since he left. The days locked in the storage room, the journey south with Baxter, and finally, her arrival at Mrs. Winston's boarding husi. "She's offered to let me buy my freedom," Selah said, "a little each week from what I earn in tips. It would take years, but—" "You don't need to wait years," Elias interrupted. "I have money, enough to buy your freedom right now." Selah looked up at him, hope and doubt warring in her eyes. "And then what? Where would we go? What would we do?" "North," Elias said without hesitation. "To Boston or maybe Philadelphia, somewhere we can be together without hiding. I have my mother's inheritance, enough to start a new life. As what? A white gentleman and his... What? What would I be to you there, Elias? My wife, he said simply. If you'll still have me. Selah was quiet for a long moment. It won't be easy, she finally said. Even in the north, people will look at us strangely. They'll talk. Let them talk. I don't care what anyone thinks except you. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen since finding her. You haven't changed. Still so sure everything will work out if we just want it enough. Won't it? He challenged gently. Selah's smile faded. Mrs. Winston has been good to me, in her way. I can't just disappear. She paid good money for me. And I'll pay her back, more than she paid if that's what it takes. Elias squeezed her hand. We'll do this properly. No running away, no sneaking around. I'll speak to her tomorrow. Tell her I want to buy your freedom. She'll want to know why. Then I'll tell her the truth, that I love you, that I want to marry you. Selah shook her head, but she was smiling again. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, maybe, but simple. He touched her cheek gently. Do you still have the ring? The one I gave you the night before I left. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the small gold band. I've kept it with me every day. Elias took it from her, and right there in the moonlight, slid it onto the third finger of her left hand. Now, it's where it belongs. They stayed in the garden for another hour, talking quietly, making plans. Selah was cautious, pointing out potential problems, while Elias was optimistic, certain they could overcome any obstacle. Finally, as the moon began to set, they knew they had to part. I'll speak to Mrs. Winston tomorrow, Elias promised. By this time tomorrow night, you could be free. Selah nodded, but her eyes were worried. Be careful how you approach her. She's fair, but she's also a businesswoman. She won't let me go easily, especially not if she thinks there's something improper going on. I'll be respectful and honest, Elias assured her, and I'll offer her a fair price, more than fair. They kissed one last time, then Selah slipped back into the house. Elias waited a few minutes before following, careful not to make any noise that might wake the other guests. In his room, he found it hard to sleep despite his exhaustion. His mind was too full of Selah, of their reunion, of the future they might have together. After months of searching, of fearing he might never find her, she was here, just downstairs. And soon, if all went well, she would be free. His wife, not someone's property. The next morning, Elias came down to breakfast, earlier than the other guests. Mrs. Winston was in the dining room arranging flowers on the table. Mrs. Winston, he said politely, might I have a word with you? In private? She looked at him suspiciously, but nodded. In my office. This way. Her office was a small room off the main parlor, with a desk and 2 chairs. She sat behind the desk and gestured for Elias to take the other chair. What can I do for you, Mr. Thompson? She asked. Elias took a deep breath. My name isn't Thompson. It's Langford. Elias Langford. Mrs. Winston's eyebrows rose. Is there a reason you lied about your identity, Mr. Langford? Yes. I've been searching for someone for a very long time. Someone who was taken from me. And I've found her here, in your house. Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. Selah, she said flatly. Elias nodded. I want to buy her freedom. I see. Mrs. Winston leaned back in her chair, studying him. And what is Selah to you, exactly? She's the woman I love. The woman I want to marry. To his surprise, Mrs. Winston didn't look shocked or outraged. She simply nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. I thought there might be something like that in her past, she said. She's too educated for an ordinary house slave. And sometimes I'd catch her looking at that gold ring she keeps hidden in her pocket. A gift from you, I assume? Yes, from M.Y. Mother originally. Mrs. Winston sighed. Mr. Langford, do you have any idea what you're proposing? The difficulties you would face? I do, and I'm prepared for them. Are you? Really? She leaned forward. Society will shun you. Your family may disown you. There are places where what you're proposing isn't just frowned upon, it's illegal. I know all that. It doesn't change how I feel or what I intend to do. Mrs. Winston was quiet for a moment, considering. You know, when I bought Selah, I thought I was getting a bargain. A house slave who could read and write, practically unheard of. But Baxter was eager to sell, and I needed the help. He was eager to sell because my father paid him to take her far away from Virginia, to make sure I couldn't find her. And yet here you are. Mrs. Winston almost smiled. You must have gone to considerable trouble and expense to track her down. I would have gone to the ends of the earth if that's what it took. She nodded slowly. I believe you would have. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a ledger. I've been allowing Selah to work toward her freedom. She's a good worker, worth more than I paid for her, but it would take her years to earn enough. I can pay whatever you ask, Elias said quickly. Double what you paid for her. Triple if that's what it takes. Mrs. Winston looked amused. Eager, thank you, but I'm not sure money is the issue here. Then what is? Selah has become valuable to me, not just as a worker, but as, well, almost as a friend. She helps me with the books, you know, has a good head for figures. I know how special she is, Elias said softly. Mrs. Winston studied him for a long moment. I believe you do. She closed the ledger. I'll need some time to think about this, Mr. Langford. It's not a decision to be made hastily. How much time? Give me until tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you would be discreet. No more midnight meetings in my garden. Elias felt his face flush. She had seen them then. Yes, ma'am, he agreed, and thank you for considering it. As he stood to leave, Mrs. Winston added, One more thing, Mr. Langford. If I do agree to this, it won't be cheap. Not because I'm greedy, but because I want to be sure you're serious, that T.S. isn't some passing fancy. It's not, Elias assured her. I've crossed half the country to find her. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. After he left the office, Elias went to find Will at the inn where he was staying. He needed to tell his friend the good news and discuss their next steps. Will was cautiously optimistic. She didn't throw you out or call the sheriff, that's a good sign, but don't count on anything until the papers are signed. I know, but I think she'll agree. She seems to care about Selah in her way. Maybe so. But caring doesn't always override business sense or social pressure. Elias nodded, acknowledging the truth in Will's words. We'll know tomorrow. That day was one of the longest of Elias's life. He caught glimpses of Selah as she went about her duties in the boarding house, but they couldn't speak privately. She gave him small smiles when no one was looking, but her eyes were anxious. That night, true to his word to Mrs. Winston, he stayed in his room, but he barely slept, too nervous about what the morning would bring. When he came down to breakfast, Mrs. Winston was waiting for him in her office. I've made my decision, she said without preamble when he entered. I'll sell you Selah's freedom papers for $500. It was a considerable sum, far more than a house slave would typically cost T. But Elias didn't hesitate. Done, he said immediately. I can have the money for you today. Mrs. Winston raised an eyebrow. You carry that kind of money with you? I have a bank draft. I came prepared to pay whatever was necessary. She nodded slowly. I thought you might, but there's one condition. What's that? I want to know what your intentions are. Specifically, what will happen to Selah once she's free? As I told you, I intend to marry he. Face, where? How? These are practical questions, Mr. Langford. Have you thought them through? Elias hesitated. We would go north. Find a place where we could live openly as husband and wife. And if no such place exists, if you find that even in the north, your marriage isn't recognized, what then? Then we'll keep looking. Or we'll live as husband and wife regardless of what others think or what the law says. Mrs. Winston sighed. Young love, so sure of itself. She stood up. Very well, $500, and she's free. But I want your word that you'll take care of her, that this isn't some game to you. You have my word, Elias said solemnly. I love her. I'll spend the rest of my life making her happy, if she'll let me. Good, because if I ever hear otherwise, I'll track you down myself. Despite her age, there was a steeliness in Mrs. Winston's eyes that made Elias believe she meant every word. "Now," she continued, "let's get the paperwork done, and then you can tell Selah yourself." An hour later, with the transaction complete and the freedom papers signed, Mrs. Winston called Selah to her office. Elias waited anxiously as Selah entered, looking confused and a little frightened. "Selah," Mrs. Winston said formally, "Mr. Langford here has purchased your freedom papers." She held out the document. "You are, as of this moment, a free woman." Selah stared at the paper, then at Elias, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Free?" "Yes," Elias confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "Free." Mrs. Winston cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk. Selah, when you're ready, come find me. We'll need to discuss your future employment, if you choose to stay on, that is." After she left, closing the door behind her, Selah turned to Elias. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "After all this time?" "Believe it," Elias said, taking her hands in his. "You're free, Selah. Free to make your own choices. Free to go wherever you want. Free to marry whoever you want. And I choose you," she said simply. "I always have." He kissed her then, no longer caring who might see them or what anyone might think. She was free, and they were together. That was all that mattered. When they finally broke apart, Selah asked, "What happens now?" "Now we leave," Elias said. "As soon you're ready. He's a friend who helped me find you, is waiting at the inn. We can be on our way to Atlanta by noon, and from there, head north." Selah nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "What about Mrs. Winston? She's been good to me. I can't just leave her without notice." "Of course not. We'll stay as long as you need to properly say goodbye and help her find a replacement." "And then? Where will we go exactly?" "I was thinking Boston," Elias said. "It's far from Virginia, far from my father's influence, and it's a city where we might find others like us, where we might not be the only ones who have crossed these lines." Selah squeezed his hands. "It sounds wonderful and terrifying. I know, but we'll face it together." He touched the ring on her finger. "As husband and wife, if you'll still have me. I told you last night and 100 times in my heart since you left Virginia, yes, Elias Langford, yes, I will marry you." In that moment, with Selah's hands in his and her eyes full of love and hope, Elias knew that everything they had endured, the separation, the search, the uncertainty, had been worth it. They had found each other against all odds, and now, finally, they could begin their life together. The challenges ahead would be many. Society would not easily accept their union. They would face prejudice, perhaps even danger. But they would face it all together, with the strength that comes from a love that had already survived so much. As they left Mrs. Winston's office, hand in hand for the first time in public, Selah held her head high. She was no longer a slave girl. She was a free woman about to become a wife, and she would finally have the name she deserved, Selah Langford. Selah stayed at Mrs. Winston's boarding house for 2 more weeks, helping train a young local girl named Mary to take her place. Elias remained as a guest, no longer hiding his relationship with Selah. The other boarders raised eyebrows and whispered behind their hands, but no one said anything direct lie to their faces. Mrs. Winston, surprisingly, became something of an ally. "People will talk no matter what you do," she told Selah one evening, as they went over the accounts one last time. "So you might as well give them something worth talking about." On their last night in Madison, Mrs. Winston invited Elias, Selah, and Will to a private dinner in her quarters. It was an unusual gesture, a white woman hosting a mixed group at her table, but Mrs. Winston had never been one to follow conventions blindly. "I've been thinking about what you two are planning," she said, as they finished their meal. "It won't be easy, even in Boston." "We know," Elias replied, "but we're prepared for that." Mrs. Winston looked at Selah. "Are you really? You've lived your whole life in the South. The North will be different in ways you can't imagine." "I'm ready for different," Selah said firmly. "I've spent 24 years as someone's property. I'm ready to be my own person, no matter how strange it feels at first." "And you'll have me," Elias added, taking her hand. "We'll figure it out together." Mrs. Winston nodded, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small pouch. "This is for you, Selah, the money you earned toward your freedom. I kept track of every penny. But you don't need to. I know I don't need to. I want to. It's your money. You earned it." She shed the pouch across the table. "It's not much, but it's a start. Your start." Selah's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. "Thank you. For everything. There's something else." Mrs. Winston pulled out a sheet of paper. "A letter of reference. It says you worked for me as a free employee, managing my accounts and helping run the boarding house. No mention of your previous status. It might help you find work in Boston if you need it." It was a thoughtful gesture and a practical one. Selah's freedom papers proved she was no longer a slave, but they also marked her as having been one. This letter gave her a different story to tell if she chose. "I don't know what to say," Selah whispered. "Say you'll write to me now and then," Mrs. Winston replied. "Let me know how you're getting on." "I will, I promise." Will, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "We should leave early tomorrow. I've arranged for a wagon to take us to the train station in Atlanta." Mrs. Winston turned to him. "And what about you, young man? Will you be going all the way to Boston with them?" Will shook his head. "No, ma'am. I have my own journey to make. My sister's still out there somewhere. Now that I've helped Mr. Langford find his cellar, it's time I tried again to find Sarah." "With my help," Elias added. "I promised Will that once we found you, I'd help him search for his sister. I've set aside money for him to continue his search after we reach Atlanta." Selah looked at Will with new understanding. "I didn't know you were looking for someone too." Will gave her a small smile. "Everyone's looking for someone, I reckon. Some are just luckier than others in finding them." The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Mrs. Winston handed Selah one last gift, a small leather-bound journal. "For your new Liffey," she said, "every free person should have a place to write their own story." The journey to Atlanta was uneventful. They arrived late in the afternoon and checked into a hotel that Will had scouted earlier, one that wouldn't ask too many questions about their unusual group. That evening, Elias and Will finalized their plans. Will would head west into Alabama, following a lead he had about plantation owners who might have purchased slaves from the same T.R. Ada who had taken his sister. "I can't thank you enough," Will told Elias, as they shared a last meal together. "Not just for the money, but for showing me that sometimes the impossible isn't so impossible after all." "I should be thanking you," Elias replied. "I never would have found Selah without your help." Selah reached across the table and squeezed Will's hand. "I hope you find your sister, and when you do, you'll know where to find us in Boston." "I'll hold you to that," Will said with a smile. The next morning, Will left for Alabama, and Elias and Selah boarded a train bound for Chattanooga, the first leg of their long journey north. They had decided to avoid Virginia entirely, taking a western route through Tennessee and Ohio instead. As the train pulled away from the station, Selah pressed her face to the window, watching Atlanta recede into the distance. She had never been on a train before, never traveled as a passenger rather than as cargo. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, noticing her silence. She turned to him with a smile that held both joy and wonder. "I'm free," she said simply. "Really free. I can go wherever this train is going because I choose to, not because someone is sending me there." Elias took her hand. "And where do you choose to go, Selah?" "With you," she replied. "Wherever that takes us." The journey north was long but full of small delights for Selah. Each new city, each new landscape was a revelation. She had never seen mountains like the ones in Tennessee, never imagined cities as busy as Cincinnati. They traveled slowly, stopping for a few days here and there to rest and explore. Elias wanted Selah to experience as much as possible, to see that the world was far bigger and more varied than the small corner of Virginia, where she had spent most of her life. In Cincinnati, they had their first real taste of what life might be like for them in the North. The city had a significant free black population, and while prejudice certainly existed, it was less rigid than in the South. They stayed at a small hotel run by a Quaker family who didn't bat an eye at their relationship. In fact, the owner, Mrs. Bennett, told them about another couple, a white man and a black woman, who had stayed with them on their way to Canada. They were mar-eyed there, Mrs. Bennet explained. Legally, with papers and everything. You might consider it yourselves. It was something they hadn't thought of, that there might be places where their marriage could be legally recognized. The idea took hold, especially for Elias, who wanted to give Selah every protection and recognition possible. From Cincinnati, they traveled to Cleveland, and from there to Buffalo, New York. Along the way, they gathered information about communities where mixed couples lived, about the legal status of such marriages in different states and territories. Canada keeps coming up in these conversations, Elias noted one evening as they discussed their options. Maybe we should consider it instead of Boston. Selah was thoughtful. Maybe, but I've set my heart on Boston. From everything we've heard, it has a strong abolitionist community and a significant population of free black people. You might find acceptance there. What about the legal recognition Mrs. Bennet mentioned? If we can be legally married in Canada. Papers don't make a marriage, Selah said softly. Love does, and commitment. We have both already. Elias smiled, raising her hand to his lips. We do, but I still want to give you my name in every way possible. Legally, socially, completely. Then we'll find a way, Selah promised, one step at a time. In Buffalo, they made a decision to visit Canada briefly, crossing into Ontario to explore the possibility of getting legally married there. What they found was encouraging. Interracial marriages were not specifically prohibited under Canadian law, and several communities welcomed Americans fleeing slavery and discrimination. In a small church in St. Catharines, Ontario, they spoke to a minister who had performed several such marriages. The law here doesn't specifically address the issue, Reverend Johnson explained, but in practice, we recognize the marriage of any two consenting adults who come before God to make their vows. And such marriages are legally binding? Elias asked. Recognized by the authorities? They are in Canada, the minister confirmed. As for how they're viewed if you return to the United States, that's more complicated. Some states might recognize it, others certainly would not. It was a hopeful start, but Selah and Elias decided to continue to Boston before making any final decisions. They wanted to see the city, to feel out the community there, before choosing where to put down roots. They arrived in Boston on a crisp autumn day, nearly 6 months after Elias had first set out to find Selah. The city was bustling, diverse, alive with commerce and ideas. It immediately felt different from the southern cities they knew. Less formal in some ways, more energetic in others. They found lodging in a modest boarding house in the north end of the city, in an area where many free black families lived alongside European immigrants. Their landlady, Mrs. O'Malley, was an Irish widow who asked few questions and seemed untroubled by their relationship. I've seen stranger things, was all she said when Elias explained that Selah was his fiancée. Rents due on the 1st of the month. Hot water for bathing on Wednesdays and Saturdays only. Their rooms were small but clean, a bedroom, a tiny sitting room, and shared access to a kitchen with 2 other tenants. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a start. Their first home together. Over the next few weeks, they explored the city and began to establish themselves. Elias, with his education and the remains of his inheritance, found work as a clerk in a shipping office. It was a step down from the position he would have gelled in his father's business, but he tackled it with enthusiasm, eager to make his own way in the world. Selah, with Mrs. Winston's letter of reference, secured a position helping with the accounts at a small dressmaker's shop owned by a Quaker woman named Rachel Thompson. When Mrs. Thompson learned that Selah could read and write, she was delighted. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," she confessed. "Having someone to manage the books and correspondence, will be a blessing." They began to make friends, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they found people who accepted them as they were. There was the Cooper family, free black people who had lived in Boston for 3 generations, the Whittiers, abolitionists who hosted discussion groups in their home, and the Rossis, Italian immigrants who ran the bakery on the corner and cared more about their customers' appreciation for good bread than about the color of their skin. Not everyone was welcoming, of course. They encountered cold stares, whispered comments, and sometimes outright hostility. There were shops where they weren't served, neighborhoods where they didn't feel safe walking together. But overall, Boston offered more freedom and acceptance than they had dared to hope for. 3 months after their arrival, they received their first letter from Will. He had traced his sister to a plantation in Mississippi, but had not yet been able to make contact with her. He was working nearby, saving money and planning his next move. "I won't give up," he wrote. "Seeing you two together gives me hope that impossible things can happen." They wrote back immediately, offering encouragement and any help they could provide. Elias sent what money he could spare, and Sela included a small gold brooch she had bought with her first earnings in Boston, a gift for Will's sister when he found her. As winter settled over Boston, Elias and Sela made their final decision. They would return to Canada in the spring to be married legally, then come back to Boston to build their life together. "We might not be able to live openly as husband and wife everywhere," Elias acknowledged, "but we'll have the certificate, the legal protection, and we'll know the truth, whatever others might think." Sela agreed. The legal recognition was important, especially if they ever had children. She wanted them to have every protection possible in a world that would challenge their very existence. The winter was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold, unlike anything Sela had experienced in Virginia or Georgia, but their small rooms were warm, and they had each other. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, reading or talking about their future. One night, as they sat together, Sela quiet and thoughtful, Elias asked, "What are you thinking about?" "My mother," she replied. "She died when I was 12, pneumonia, after working in the fields during a winter rain." She looked up at him. "She taught me to read, you know, in secret, at night, by candlelight. It was dangerous for both of us." "She sounds brave," Elias said softly. "Like her daughter." Sela smiled sadly. "She always told me that knowledge was freedom. That once you could they couldn't keep your mind enslaved, even if your body wasn't free." She looked around their small but comfortable room. "I wish she could see me now, free, about to be married, living a life she couldn't even imagine." "She'd be proud of you," Elias said, taking her hand. "So proud." "I think about my children too," Sela admitted. "Our children, if we have them, what their lives will be like." It was something they had discussed before, but always in abstract terms. The reality of bringing children into a world that might not accept them was daunting. "They'll have challenges," Elias acknowledged, "but they'll also have us, and they'll grow up free, knowing who they are and that they deserve everything life has to offer." Sela nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "And they'll know their history, all of it, the hard parts and the triumphant parts. Like how their father crossed half the Coantry to find their mother," Elias teased gently. "Like how their mother waited and never lost hope," Sela countered with a smile. Spring came late to Boston that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought a burst of new life and energy to the city. Trees that had seemed dead all winter suddenly sprouted tender green leaves. Flowers pushed up through the soil in the small parks and gardens. Sela bloomed too, growing more confident in her new life with each passing day. She had friends now, a job she enjoyed, and a community that, while not entirely accepting, at least allowed her to live with dignity. In early May, they made their journey back to St. Catharines, Ontario. It was a moment they had been planning for months, and yet when it arrived, it seemed almost surreal. The church was small and plain, but to Sela, it was more beautiful than the grandest cathedral. Reverend Johnson welcomed them warmly, and 2 members of his congregation agreed to serve as witnesses. Sela wore a simple blue dress that she and Mrs. Thompson had made together, with tiny white flowers embroidered around the collar. Around her neck, she wore a small locket that Elias had given her for Christmas, containing a tiny lock of his hair. Elias wore his best suit, his face solemn but his eyes shining with joy as he watched Sela walk toward him down the short aisle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They had written their own vows, promises that acknowledged the difficult journey that had brought them to this moment and the challenges that still lay ahead. "I take you as my husband," Sela said, her voice clear and steady. "Not because any law or custom says I should, but because I choose you, freely and completely. I promise to stand by you through whatever comes, to build a life with you that honors the love we've fought so hard to preserve. I take you as my wife, Elias responded, not as something fragile to be protected, but as my equal partner in all things. I promise to walk beside you, never ahead or behind, as we face whatever the world brings. And I promise that you will always have the name you deserve, the name that tells the world you are loved, respected, and free. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed Selah with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of their witnesses. Then he slipped his mother's ring, the one he had given Selah that night on the porch of the Langford estate, off her right hand and placed it on the third finger of her left, where it belonged. "Mrs. Selah Langford," he whispered, just for her. At last. After the ceremony, they spent a week in St. Catharines, a brief honeymoon before returning to Boston and their everyday life. It was a peaceful time, a chance to simply be together without the pressures and judgments of the outside world. On their last night in Canada, as they sat on the porch of the small inn where they were staying, Selah asked the question that had been on her mind for some time. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving your home, your inheritance, your position, everything you were raised to expect?" Elias turned to her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment. Those things, the estate, the business, the social standing, they were never really mine. They were my father's vision for me, not my own." "And what is your vision?" Selah asked. "What do you want for your life now?" Elias smiled, taking her hand. "This. Us. Building something together that's truly ours. I want to work for what we have, to know that we earned it. I want children who grow up understanding that worth isn't about birth or status or color, but about how you treat others and what you contribute to the world." "That's a good vision," Selah said softly. "One worth working for." "What about you?" Elias asked. "Do you ever wish I'd found you sooner? Or that things had been different?" Selah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I used to," she finally admitted. "In those first weeks after you left and your father sold me, I was so angry. I wished you had taken me with you that night, that we had run away to Ojather instead of trusting him. I should have," Elias said, regret in his voice. "I was naive to think he would keep his word. Maybe. But if we had run then, we would have always been running. This way." She gestured to the document that certified their marriage, sitting on the table between them. "This way we're building something real, something open and honest. No hiding, no shame." Elias nodded. "You're right. As usual." He kissed her hand. Besides, if things had been different, we might not have met Will, and he might never have had the chance to find his sister. "Have you heard from him recently?" Selah asked. "A letter came just before we left Boston. He's made contact with Sarah. She's alive, working as a house slave for a family in Vicksburg. He's saving to buy her freedom." "That's wonderful news," Selah said, genuinely happy for their friend. "We should help him. When we get back to Bossy, we can send more money." "I already planned to," Elias assured her. "I promised him we'd help, and I intend to keep that promise." The next day, they began their journey back to Boston, back to their new home and the life they were building together. As the train carried them across the countryside, Selah leaned her head on Elias's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, noticing her smile. "I has thinking about that night at your father's dinner party," she replied, "when Mr. Halbridge called me just a slave girl, and you stood up and said I was your future wife." "I remember," Elias said, his arm tightening around her. "I think I shocked myself as much as everyone else." "Did you mean it then? Or was it just anger speaking?" "I meant it," he said without hesitation. "I had been in love with you for months by then. I just hadn't found the courage to say it out loud." "Well, Mr. Halbridge was wrong about me," Selah said, lifting her left hand to admire her ring. "And you were right." "I usually am," Elias teased, earning a playful swat from his wife. 6 months after their wedding, they received a letter from Will that brought them both to tears of joy. He had successfully purchased his sister's freedom and was bringing her north. They would pass through Boston on their way to Canada, where Sarah would be truly safe from any attempt to reclaim her. "You must stay with us," Selah wrote back immediately. "For as long as you need, our home is your home." When Will and Sarah arrived, it was an emotional reunion. Sarah was thin and wary, her eyes holding the same haunted look that Selah recognized from her own mirror in those first days of freedom. But there was hope there too, and determination. "Will told me about you two," Sarah said as they sat a row. "Gone the small table in Elias and Selah's apartment. About how you found each other again. It gave me hope that I might see my brother again too." "And now you have," Selah said warmly. "You're together, and you're both free." During the week that Will and Sarah stayed with them, they shared stories, advice, and plans for the future. Sarah, like her brother, had been taught to read by their mother, and she was eager to use that skill in her new life. "I wa and to teach," she confided to Selah, "to help others learn what I know. Will says there are schools in Canada for free black children." "There are," Selah confirmed, "and they need good teachers." The night before Will and Sarah were to leave for Canada, they sat up late talking about the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. "If my father hadn't sold Selah, I never would have met Will," Elias mused, "and Will might never have found Essie, Hera. And if that trader Baxter hadn't brought me to Mrs. Winston's boarding house, you might never have found me," Selah added. "It's like a tapestry," Sarah said thoughtfully. "All these separate threads that somehow weave together into a pattern that makes sense, even when the individual threads seem random or cruel." "I like that image," Will said, smiling at his sister. "The tapestry isn't finished yet, though. We're still weaving it, all of us." See, her next morning, as they said their goodbyes at the train station, Will pulled Elias aside for a moment. "I never properly thanked you," he said, "for everything you did to help me find Sarah." "You helped me find Selah first," Elias reminded him. "I was just returning the favor." Will shook his head. "It was more than that. You showed me that it was possible to defy expectations, to break rules that needed breaking. That sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing or the accepted thing." "We've all learned that lesson, I think," Elias said, glancing at Selah and Sarah, who were sharing a tearful embrace. "And we're better for it." As the train pulled away, carrying Will and Sarah to their new life in Canada, Selah slipped her hand into Elias's. "They'll be all right," she said confidently. "They have each other now." "Like us," Elias agreed, squeezing her hand. They walked home slowly, enjoying the crisp, autumn air and the familiar sights of their neighborhood. They had news of their own to share, news they had confirmed just the day before, but had decided to keep private for now. In the spring, their family would grow by one. Their first child was on the way, a new life created from their love and hope for the future. That night, as they lay in bed talking about names and plans and dreams for their baby, Selah felt a sense of completion she had never known before. She had come so far from that night in the Langford dining room, from being just a slave girl to being Mrs. Selah Langford, free woman, beloved wife, and soon-to-be mother. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Names," she replied. "How important they are, what they mean." "And what name are you thinking of for our child?" he asked, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Eleanor, after Mrs. Winston, who helped make this possible." "Eleanor Langford," Elias said, trying it out. "It's beautiful. And if it's a boy?" Selah smiled. "William, after the friend who helped us find each other again." "Perfect," Elias agreed. "Eleanor or William Langford. Names with meaning. Names they can be proud of. Names they deserve," Selah added softly. As they drifted off to sleep, Selah thought about all the names she had carried in her life: slave, property, girl. And now the ones that mattered: free, wife, friend, soon, mother. But most important of all was the name she had waited for, fought for, and finally claimed as her own. Langford, the name she deserved,